after President Trump unexpectedly threw a wrench into negotiations in Congress to renew a key surveillance tool known as FISA that lapsed last Friday. Today, the Senate Intelligence Committee postponed the confirmation hearing of President Trump's pick for Director of National Intelligence, Jay Clayton, after the president said he was delaying Clayton's nomination. Now, the president announced on social media he was, quote, canceling the hearing, saying, quote, to add a slight bit of intrigue, but for the good of the nation and the people of our country, I will not approve FISA without the Save America Act going along with it. That's, of course, the president's bill to overhaul elections in America. Senate leaders have repeatedly said it doesn't have the votes to pass. Senators on both sides of the aisle expressing concern over the move. Take a look.
I was surprised. I was looking forward to the hearing and the opportunity to ask some questions of Mr. Clayton. I'm concerned that this slows down the renewal of FISA, which is vital to our national security.
Donald Trump seems hell-bent on stopping FISA, which is a threat to our country, by this absolutely chaotic approach to the appointment of a DNI. And FISA would seem to be dead on arrival here in almost any form, as long as Bill Pulte remains in that job.
Joining me now is Capitol Hill correspondent Melanie Zanona. Mel, so where does this leave Jay Clayton's nomination? A lot of head scratching on the Hill today.
Yeah, head scratching is probably the nicest way to put it. It is completely up in the air when this nomination is actually going to get done, because President Donald Trump gave no indication about when he is willing to let his own nominee come to the Hill and get confirmed, which also means, Kristen, that this critical surveillance law, which expired last Friday, is also going to remain lapsed. Because remember, GOP leadership, they were trying to lightning speed fast track this confirmation process because there was a lot of bipartisan outrage over Trump's acting director for the DNI that he had selected, Bill Pulte, who is not in the job yet. And so GOP leaders really begged Trump to name his permanent replacement. That's when he named Jay Clayton, someone who Democrats said they actually respected and had a lot of praise for. So GOP leaders thought they found their way out of this mess by trying to get him confirmed and then hopefully unlocking the votes to open up that FISA bill. However, once Trump realized that meant that Pulte was never going to be in the job, he quickly threw a wrench into those plans this morning, really making GOP leadership's life more difficult. So that's where we're at right now. Just one of many examples of Trump sort of throwing a grenade onto the laps of Senate Republicans and making their lives so much more difficult, Kristen.
Yeah, well, let's talk about the other curveball sticking point here. The president saying he now wants the Save America Act attached to the FISA renewal. Is there any world where that gets passed? Leader Thune has said there aren't the votes to pass it.
Yeah, I mean, the Senate has tried repeatedly and failed repeatedly to pass the SAVE Act. The reality is the votes are just not there. They need 60 votes in the Senate in order to be able to pass a bill like that. They also tried to push it through reconciliation, where only a 50-vote threshold is required. They weren't able to get around the rules there either. And GOP leader John Thune knows that better than anyone. Just take a listen to what he said on Fox News last night.
We are doing everything that we can, but it is a function of math. I mean, we are bound by arithmetic in the United States Senate. The votes currently aren't there, but if you tried to attach it, for example, to FISA, it would tank FISA.
So, Kristen, unless Trump backs off of his demand to attach the SAVE Act and unless he lets his nominee go through on Capitol Hill, it seems that we are still at a standstill over this critical FISA debate. Kristen.
Yes, John Thune's job just got even more difficult. Mel Zanona on Capitol Hill for us. Thanks so much. Joining me now is Democratic Senator Mark Warner of Virginia. He's the top Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee. Senator, thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Kristen.
Well, we're going to get to everything that happened with the Intelligence Committee and Jay Clayton's confirmation hearing in just a moment, but I do want to start on the latest with Iran. Can you give us your reaction to what we heard from the president today about the memorandum of understanding? Do you think this is a positive step toward ending the war?
Well, I think the fact that the president is declaring victory and ending the war is positive. I think this memorandum and agreement won't stand the test of time. I think even as good a salesman as Donald Trump is, no way he can sell this as a win for America. And if we look at the items, I mean, the regime is more radical than the prior regime before the war. This memorandum doesn't even mention the Iranian ballistic missiles and drones, and they've still got 50% of the missiles, 60% of the missiles, and 50% are launchers and countless drones. It doesn't mention the Iranian proxy forces, where the $300 billion, wherever that comes from, my fear is a lot of that money will end up in the hands of Hezbollah or the Houthis in Yemen, which will destabilize the region. And while the strait may be reopened, we know that Iran, because of their capacity of having literally hundreds of these small speedboats, which can any moment go out and place mines in the strait, they have a de facto ability to close down the strait at any point, which is worse than we were before the war. And the idea that Iran promised not to move to a nuclear weapon, well, they'd had that promise. And Trump's own intelligence community said they weren't moving towards a weapon. So this was a war of choice. And then finally, the idea that the Iranians over the next 60 days are going to somehow give up their enriched uranium, is I think wishful thinking at best and foolish at worst. And you've even heard at least reports that serious people in the Trump administration are questioning whether the Iranians are really serious. They have been able to negotiate on these items for now decades. And I don't see how this puts us, again, in any better situation, us, our allies in the region, than before the president started the war of choice.
Well, let me ask you to respond to one of your colleagues, Chris Murphy, who told Notice that if this memorandum of understanding ends the war, the deal is, quote, a disaster, but it's probably a necessary disaster, he calls it. Do you agree with that assessment, that it's a necessary disaster?
I believe that continuing this war, bombing the Iranians, was not going to bring them around. The fact that Americans have already paid $60 billion in additional cost on gas, the fact that we are going to continue to see gas costs, fertilizer costs that come from this region, aluminum costs that come through the Strait of Hormuz, none of that is going to return to pre-war levels in weeks or months, if ever. That the war needed to come to an end. And if the president declares victory, I think there may be a group of sycophants around him who will say, attaboy, but neither history nor our allies nor our adversaries will ever see this as a victory for America. We are, unfortunately, in a worse position after the president started, again, a war of choice. There was no imminent threat from Iran.
Well, let me just ask you, though. President Trump insists he's going to get that final deal in which Iran will ultimately turn over what he has referred to as its nuclear dust and then commit to not developing a nuclear weapon. If that is the outcome, Senator, understanding that there's this 60-day period to try to negotiate those terms, would that have been worth it?
Listen, if we can permanently make sure Iran does not move towards a nuclear weapon, yes, I will give the president credit. But anyone who's been an observer of this region and the Iranians' negotiating styles, I don't think you could find anyone that thinks that that is a probable outcome. And, we may end up at almost back where we were with the deal under Obama, which was called the JCPOA. The only difference was at that point in time, the international regime that was trying to hold Iran in check included the Europeans, us. It also included the Russians and the Chinese. Well, in the 15 or 12 years or so since the deal was signed, the Russians and Chinese are now fully on the Iranian side. We're not even sure whether our European allies are on our side. And because of the way Trump has treated them and his move towards Greenland and so forth. Again, I would love to be proven wrong and see the Iranians, literally these canisters of enriched uranium, which are very volatile, would require literally thousands of troops on the ground to take them out, even, I think, within a ceasefire circumstance. I just don't I will be surprised if that happens. I will be pleasantly surprised if that happens. But the Iranians have known they have taken on America and Israel, and at worst fought them to a draw. And Iran has, again, de facto control over or ability to influence the Straits of Hormuz. And the proxies will get some of this $300 billion, I believe. They still have the missile capacity. And I'm not sure, other than renewing their commitment that they wouldn't build a bomb, which they already had in place, what we've got other than 13 American soldiers lost, billions of expenses in the region, $60 billion of American gas costs alone going up. Even Donald Trump in his best salesman day can't sell that as a win.
All right, Senator, I do want to turn to the president deciding to delay Jay Clayton's nomination for Director of National Intelligence. He was set to appear before your committee today. President Trump says Democrats were going to vote against the FISA reauthorization, even if Clayton was confirmed. What's your response to these developments and to the fact that the hearing has now been delayed?
My response is this. Section 702, which is our ability to listen in on foreigners talking to foreigners abroad, a critical tool, was on a path to a bipartisan 3-year extension. It's always a tough argument because there are inadvertently Americans that may be talking to a foreigner and your name comes up repeated. We need to figure out, are you a spy or are you a victim of a hack? It's always controversial, but we had worked in a bipartisan way with Tom Cotton, my partner on the Intelligence Committee, and we are on a path to getting this done. And then Donald Trump throws the singularly most unqualified individual possible in Mr. Bill Pulte, who doesn't even have a security clearance, who has no experience in national security. The only thing we know about him is he's absolutely loyal to Donald Trump, will do anything. And the idea of what he's done in a relatively benign position, managing our mortgage industry, has managed to weaponize private mortgage information against people like Lisa Cook of the Federal Reserve. So that kind of inappropriate behavior is getting rewarded with the keys to the kingdom of all of our country's secrets as Director of National Intelligence. Even my Republicans all pushed back. Serious people within the Trump administration all pushed back. The president retreated last week and said, oh, well, we'll just make him act him and I'll put somebody else up. And Jay Clayton, who many Democrats would have voted against, he'd been the U.S. attorney from the Southern District of New York, but I've known Jay, and I had tough questions for him. But he was competent. He was on a path to actually getting confirmed, so we wouldn't have this lapse of the Section 702. Also, we wouldn't have Pulte in the job. And because the system was actually going to work in a bipartisan way, Trump again, in the middle of the night last night, threw another hand grenade and said, no, I'm not going to let my choice, Clayton, become the Director of National Intelligence, at least in the short term, which shows that the president is willing to play politics with our national security.
Do you know when a new hearing is going to be scheduled, Senator? Do you know when a new hearing is going to be scheduled?
No, I'm not even sure whether Mr. Clayton is going to still be the nominee. He didn't know this morning. I hope it'll get scheduled again very shortly. But I think, again, Donald Trump was playing politics with our national security, saying he wants this guy Pulte in there to get a look, I guess, at all of our country's top secrets. That is a national security risk. Even people in the Trump administration acknowledge that. And the good news is, though, even though the Section 702 has expired and that gets pretty complicated, the telecommunication companies are still working with the government, so we still have coverage. So we have not had a national security lapse yet. But the biggest security problem is Bill Pulte being in this job without even a security clearance is a potential national disaster in terms of national security. And it doesn't appear that Donald Trump cares.
How would you answer the sort of main question here, which is, does the threat of Bill Pulte as acting DNI actually outweigh the risks of FISA not being reauthorized? Of course, there are major events right now going on around the country, the World Cup, the America 250 celebrations. How do you balance that, Senator?
Well, it is a balance. And I want this tool renewed. We were on a bipartisan path to get it done. I think there were more than enough Democratic votes. With Bill Pulte as the acting director, regardless of what I do, there aren't the votes. And everybody knew that. Donald Trump threw this wrench into this process. And again, I feel less immediate pressure right now because the telecommunication companies are still cooperating with the government. And I appreciate that. But with the World Cup, with other things happening, with our 250th anniversary, the cavalier attitude that the president has on this is pretty stunning. And I, again, don't believe me. Please believe my Republican colleagues who've all said, virtually without exception, Bill Pulte does not have the temperament, the experience, or the background to be the director of national security. My concern about Pulte isn't what he could do, mischief he could do with 702. There is an audit trail there. My concern with Bill Pulte is if he gets our nation's top secrets, I have no trust that he won't reveal those. I have no trust that he won't try to weaponize the intelligence community against free and fair elections in this country. Again, I go back to the case where I started. If he couldn't even keep mortgage information secret, what will he do with our nation's, secret weapons programs, with our nation's, most secure spies that we have, with our ability to look at our adversaries? This is a national security threat, and it's jaw-dropping. And it's one of the reasons why so many of the people in the Trump administration have worked with us quietly to see if we could avoid it. But at least for some short period of time, and it looks like Pulte will be there.
All right. Senator Mark Warner, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Kristen.
We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.